Are we live? Okay, it's 6:03 p.m. and this is the June 16th, 2021 public meeting of the East Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District Study Committee. I'm Charlie Sullivan, Executive Director of the Cambridge Historical Commission. Before beginning the meeting, I will first confirm the members of the committee are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please say present. Ronald Kramer, Jr.
Present.
Thank you. William Dines.
Present.
Francesca Gordini.
Present.
Valerie Reese.
Present.
Gavin Cleespies.
Present.
Paula Paris told me she would not attend, could not attend. Kyle Sheffield.
Present.
Thank you. So we have 6 members present, which is a quorum, and I'll now call the meeting to order. Sarah, can we get people's images on the screen?
Most of them are on the screen.
Oh, not on my screen. Okay. That's my problem, not yours. So to city staff, when I call your name, please say present. Sarah Burks, Preservation Planner.
Present.
And Eric Hill, Survey Director.
Present.
Thank you. This public meeting is being conducted remotely with the extension of Governor Baker's remote meeting policies signed into law this morning. The law suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in publicly accessible physical locations. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The new statute allows public bodies to meet remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. For this meeting, the study committee is convening by Zoom webinar. Please note that we are recording this meeting and we will share the recording files with Cityview 22 for broadcast. And I think that broadcast is happening simultaneously this month. Last month it was on a delay. The agenda is posted on the Historical Commission's website on the East Cambridge NCD study page. We will screen share the staff slides via Zoom during the meeting and will add them to the web page following the meeting. The URL for the NCD study page is https://tinyurl.com/ECNCD study. The meeting ground rules to the committee members, please mute your audio to prevent background noise distractions and remember to unmute yourself before beginning to speak. Please speak clearly to help the staff who prepare the minutes. Please identify yourself each time you speak, as some attendees may be joining with audio-only connections. This meeting will conclude no later than 8 p.m. As to public comment, there will be several occasions for public comment during the meeting. After committee members have asked questions, have had discussion, we will have public comment. I will first ask members of the public who wish to speak to use the raise hand button in Zoom to alert staff. We will allot everyone time to speak based on the remaining meeting time and the number of people wishing to comment. Typically, comments are limited to 3 minutes. Only comments related to tonight's agenda will be allowed. If comments are deemed out of order, I may ask you to focus your comments on the matter at hand. Derogatory remarks or personal attacks will not be allowed. Staff will then call on each speaker by name and allow you to unmute your audio. Please state your full name and address before you make your comments. We recommend sending comments to staff via email at ehill@cambridgema.gov so we can forward them to committee members prior to the next meeting. So I'm going to share my screen. Sarah, can you let me do that?
You have to promote Charlie.
I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I was in the wrong place. So, yikes, I'm still in the wrong place. All you guys on the screen also. So for tonight, I'm going to review the general history of the study and the purpose for the study, in case folks have not tuned in before. We're going to look at the reformatted jurisdiction and implementation material, some of which I've been sharing with the committee over the last couple of days. It's a work in progress. I'll be going over the latest version in this PowerPoint. And then I have a slideshow on Cambridge Street and the types of structures and storefronts that are on Cambridge Street and the kinds of guidelines that might apply to the commercial district. And then, of course, we'll also have public comment at the end as well. So this is the general outlines of Conservation District history. Conservation districts are established to protect architecturally and historically distinctive areas of special concern. The City Council's designated 4 conservation districts since 1983. These districts, which vary from the commercial area of Harvard Square to residential districts in mid-Cambridge, Half-Ground Marsh, and Avon Hill, are empowered to approve new construction, demolition, and certain alterations visible from a public way, according to guidelines that are tailored to each district. So the establishment of a conservation district recognizes the particular design and architectural qualities of neighborhoods and encourages their protection and maintenance for the benefit of the entire city. The boundaries and jurisdiction of a potential East Cambridge NCD will emerge from the current study, and the decision to enact the NCD will rest in the Cambridge City Council. So whereas historic districts regulate every publicly visible feature of an existing and proposed districts, including color, where the goal is to preserve buildings and exterior features throughout the district, conservation districts are tailored to meet the particular needs of each neighborhood. The goal is to conserve significant buildings and features. Regulations are designed to protect the most important buildings and architectural features while allowing most alterations to proceed without review. Conservation districts are governed by a commission of neighborhood residents and property owners appointed by the city manager. In conservation districts, often special consideration is given to protecting properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places, which is a list of building sites, structures, and districts that are important in American history, culture, architecture, archaeology at the national, state, or local level. This is a federal designation administered by the Secretary of the Interior through the Massachusetts Historical Commission. Listing on the National Register recognizes the importance of a site to the community, state, or nation. Register is used as a planning tool by agencies regarding projects that are funded or permitted by the state or federal governments. National Register listing in no way limits changes to the property unless the project involves federal or state funding licenses or permits. And then finally, the East Cambridge study was initiated 2 years ago following a broad public outreach by petitioners who convinced the Historical Commission to accept a petition to initiate a study. Since that time, East Cambridge has been administered as though a district were already in place by the Cambridge Historical Commission. The petition included a study area boundary, which was adjusted by the commission before it was accepted. This is the current study area boundary. running from Gold Star Mothers Park in the northwest to Leechmere Square, excluding the station, down to Rogers Street, around the new park on Rogers Street, over towards and around Hearn Field, up the Grand Junction branch, and back to the point of the beginning, which includes both residential districts and a commercial district along Cambridge Street. So the committee has spent several meetings drafting and reviewing potential goals for the goals and secondary goals for the East Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District. This is the text that has been reviewed most thoroughly. This is the red lines represent some edits since the last study committee meeting, and these are fairly minor. We took out the conditional tense that the goal of the East Cambridge District would be to conserve the character, et cetera, and replace that with is. This is foreseeing that if the district is adopted or enacted by the City Council, then this would be the goal statement for that conservation district. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but the commission, I think, committee members are welcome to raise questions or comments if you feel they're necessary, or if you have additional ideas about how these could be stated. So the secondary goals have also been discussed at several meetings. This is the language that we were left with at the end of the last meeting. I've accepted a number of changes that were discussed at that time. There are no further changes in these first 5 goals, but they generally speak about conserving the diverse architectural character of the district, allowing for diversity and individualized alterations, retaining significant architectural features, allowing and encouraging additional housing units and density while retaining significant historic structures, encouraging contemporary design that respects surrounding context, it differentiates itself. And then they go on. There are 2 goals that are particularly pertinent to the commercial district along Cambridge Street. Those are in orange. Sustain the vitality of the commercial environment of Cambridge Street by preserving architecturally significant or original building fabric. When this is not possible or appropriate, support creative contemporary design for infill construction, signage, and storefront alterations and additions. And the red language is language that we added following the discussion last month and following a discussion we had with the director of the East Cambridge Business Association last week. Then goal 7 is also pertinent to Cambridge Street. We suggest encouraging higher density projects on Cambridge Street, especially in mixed-use buildings, and supporting existing and future residential uses there. We struck out the higher density residential term as being redundant and not wanting to discourage other types of high density projects like offices or commercial structures. Then encouraging trees and greenery, and then encouraging low fences to protect views of houses and through yards while permitting flexibility to enhance privacy and security and minimize the adverse visual effect of trash containers and mechanical equipment. The measure of the language about enhancing privacy and security is in recognition that in a very dense neighborhood like this, where the yard space is limited, a low fence might not provide the privacy or security desired by the property owner. And so, well, you will see that we have exemptions for certain kinds of fences. This is a way in which a new higher fence could be justified. if it met these secondary goals. So, commissioners, any discussion about the goals or secondary goals?
Golly, this is Bill Dines. The heading up there says there's 6 through 10, but we only have 9 showing.
Oh.
Was one omitted?
Yes, after a discussion last month, we took out a goal 10, which referred to traffic
All right.
and traffic calming. So, yeah, thank you. We'll take care of that. Any other comments? Okay, well, this is not final. I mean, the record remains open, and we'll continue to hash this out. But this appears to be the direction that we're going, and so. If that's okay, I would like to move on, and then we will have public comment on this in a couple of minutes. But the next section has to do with the jurisdiction of the commission and the nature of things that would be subject to review and the nature of that review. So it got extremely complicated last month. You remember we had a spreadsheet that had numerous columns and options for different kinds of reviews. So we've tried to streamline this to make it clear and understandable, and to exempt types of building alterations and matters that don't threaten the character of the community in a significant way. So the idea is to impose regulations, if we have to, only on the most important things that have the potential of adversely affecting the character of East Cambridge in general, or its significant buildings and features in particular. So we thought it would be simpler and more comprehensible if we started with a list of exemptions from review. Now, some of these things require building permits and some do not. What we're proposing is that if something does not require a building permit, the owner is under no obligation to talk to the commission or the staff. It just goes ahead and does the work. If a permit is required for something that's on this list of exempt activities, then that would be granted a certificate of non-applicability after a non-binding discussion with the commission staff. So ordinary maintenance and ordinary repairs in kind. So this could cover ordinary repairs, fixing handrails, putting up mailboxes, doing the sorts of ordinary things that we always see. Interior alterations are never subject to review, but might need a building permit, in which case that would be automatically signed off on by the commission staff. Exterior alterations not visible from a public way would be exempt from review, as well as paint color and painting, with the exception of previously unpainted masonry. Putting paint over an unpainted masonry wall can be destructive, and so that would require an application to the commission for a certificate of appropriateness. Storm doors, storm windows, window air conditioners, no review. We've had several discussions with property owners about putting in or enlarging openings in foundations for windows and light wells. We think that activity could be exempted from review throughout the district. HVAC equipment, We've already exempted window air conditioners. This would cover compressors, like mini-split installations, and high-efficiency furnace vents, as long as they're behind the principal wall plane of a building, which on a corner building could be either a side or a front. Flat skylights and solar panels, satellite dishes, and the like. New roofing, there's a wide range of choices for asphalt shingles these days. We're considering that that's not a choice that the commission needs to get involved in. Uh-oh, my screen is... Okay, there we go. Continues the exemptions. Exterior lighting that conforms to city codes, which govern, light spill onto adjacent properties. Terraces, walks, driveways, sidewalks, and similar features at grade level. Walls and fences that would be 4 feet high or less between the sidewalk and the principal wall plane of the building, or 6 feet high or less behind the principal wall plane of the building. And there's a footnote about how that's measured. So walls or fences like this could be built without any discussion, and don't meet building permits unless they're more than 6 feet. So there'd be simply no discussion about this type of wall or fence. And then a couple of provisions that apply to Cambridge Street. The first one, alterations to commercial building facades, that the staff of the Historical Commission determines will, will uncover the decorative or structural framework of the building originally intended to surround a storefront. So this is a version of the Harvard Square rule. We've clarified it and tried to make it simpler, because I realized when I read it that I didn't understand it, and it wasn't, we've been administering this rule for 20 years now, but once you actually came down to read it, it wasn't very comprehensible. So this derives from the fact that many storefronts, many buildings with storefronts have seen accretions of additional layers and alterations that hide or obscure the original storefront opening, and often the original structural framework or the original surround of the storefront is still present under all those layers. And when that can be removed, all of that stuff removed, and the original opening rediscovered, we take no jurisdiction over the new storefront that goes within that opening. So simply put, restoring a storefront opening entitles the property owner to install any kind of storefront that the designer can create within that opening. Then we're also concerned about the few storefronts remaining that have original features or are original in themselves. In Harvard Square, we called out 4 storefronts. There were only 4 in all of Harvard Square that were original, and they included the Art Nouveau storefront on Mass Avenue, and a couple of other commercial storefronts that were distinctive because they had never been altered. I don't think it's justified to go to that lengths on Cambridge Street, but where these original elements exist, and you'll see that they're very rare, then I think we could exempt activities that protects them, storefront alterations that protect those features. And then signs conforming to the city sign code would always be exempt. In Harvard Square, we have a provision that allows the Historical Commission to approve non-conforming signs. That was, that, I'm sorry, who was that speaking? So I'm almost done here, and then we'll have discussion and public comment. So in Harvard Square, the commission is able to permit signs that are non-conforming under the zoning code. And we would like to have a similar provision on Cambridge Street. The Cambridge sign code is very restrictive, and it's, I guess you could call it good taste run to an extreme. And we think many of the traditional signs, projecting signs, illuminated signs, neon signs, give character and interest to commercial districts. So in Harvard Square, we've been able to permit a steaming bagel, a spinning tomato sign, and a number of others, illuminated signs that are absolutely prohibited under the sign code, but were desired by the tenants and were found appropriate by the Historical Commission. But that would require amending the zoning ordinance, and something I would recommend if this goes ahead. But for the time being, all we would be able to do would be to exempt from review conforming signs. So, hold on. So I'm going to just take one more step here, and then we'll have public comment. So we've talked a lot about binding review and non-binding review, and we've been going down the direction of having a stricter or binding review in a stricter review for National Register properties and a less strict review for properties that are not on the National Register. And so to remind you, I'll jump ahead to this map that shows in the color, the peach and the yellow represent properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places. And the purple. There's a purple district up on Winter Street, and the peach is another district along Otis and Thorndike Streets, and then the yellow buildings are individually designated buildings, although the Sacred Heart Complex is multiple buildings. In any event, these are what's on the National Register. So what we're looking at is recommending for National Register properties, there would be binding review by the Commission over new construction, over demolition, and additions that we can define further. There may be a threshold there. And then all exterior alterations, unless they show up on the listed exemptions. And then for every other property in the district, there would be binding review over new construction, demolition, and additions, and then only over exterior alterations that involve removing all the exterior materials down to the sheathing. That's a gut rehab on the exterior. Changes to roof form, shape, or height. Typically, that's raising roofs. We've seen several of those projects. Changes to door and window sizes and locations, except basement windows, which we've exempted, and storefront alterations. And then removing or covering original door or window hoods or cornice, door and window hoods and cornice trim on the primary facades. And I think I would add to this porches. Sometimes porches are a significant feature. So that's how this is shaking out. And I'd love to have discussion with the study committee members and then public comment.
think the list that you outlined on the screen here, Charlie, makes sense to me in terms of non-national register properties for binding review.
I'm sorry, Kyle, is that a question or a request?
No question, just a comment.
Oh, thank you. Ron, you've got your hand up.
Ron, you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, my audio cut out. Charlie, in Harvard Square, you only identified 4 storefronts that were targeted, so you did the work to specifically drill down on those 4 properties.
Yep.
Why couldn't we save a lot of headache here and just identify the specific properties on Cambridge Street that we're interested in preserving and exempt everybody else? The business community doesn't want this. The owners on Cambridge Street don't want this.
Well, we could get to that. I've got the rest of this presentation is all about Cambridge Street. So we certainly could discuss that, but I'd like to show you the Cambridge Street presentation first. Gavin.
Thanks. So I just was wondering if we needed to have any more sort of specificity about the non-regulation of new openings in the foundation. I mean, is there the possibility that that becomes kind of a slippery slope? Should we be more explicit about that? I mean, if you have I don't know, a brick townhouse, can the person just say, 8 feet up is still part of the foundation because it's all the same brick wall? I mean, do we need to be more specific about that?
Well, what do you have in mind? I mean, they could be subject to review in National Register districts.
I mean, that might be a good. I think that might be a good idea. I just sort of wonder, like, if that's a relatively open-ended description, and if you might want some more, like, no review if it's under a certain size, or no review if it's, non-invasive. I just would sort of. I think you could change the character of a building pretty dramatically and claim that it was all just a new opening in the foundation.
We could say below the first floor level, if that's more specific.
And I think saying that in keeping with the National Register being a different type of review would also make sense.
All right. Okay. What else?
I had one, Charlie, this is Kyle again. I had one question about maybe being a little more specific with respect to roof form.
Yeah.
Roof shape or height, and including dormers. I know that can be technically sort of assumed as being an addition, but in my mind, it makes sense to be more specific with respect to roof forms.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've seen two different kinds of alterations to roofs, mostly raising to gain additional height or an additional story, and dormers.
Charlie, Francesca speaking. I would agree with you what you commented earlier about porches, especially if they're front and side facades, if they're visible, whatever's visible from the street view.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'd like to pose a question. I saw there's like one of the homes, I think it's either 7th Street or 8th, that's being fully raised from the foundation. Is that something we are capturing or not? Should we? because if we're raising concern over just raising a roof, I would assume that if we're raising an entire structure, that should also pose a concern.
Raising the entire structure,
From the first floor, it looked like it's jacked up, and I don't know if it's just jacked up because the foundation's being redone and sistered and fixed, or if it's just being fully raised. I'm not sure. It's something that's under construction.
Eric, would you like to comment on that?
I'm not familiar, I don't know the address, so I can follow up with you after and see.
It's something at the corner of Gore Street and probably 8th or 7th.
Okay.
Walk by and take a peek.
Yeah, I can follow up with that.
This Buildings, I rode by there today and I happened to notice that as well. It appears they're probably rebuilding the existing foundation on that property. It looks like there's support structures there. I don't think they're raising the whole building, but maybe Eric could follow up on that.
I don't know. Since I couldn't tell last I was there, it was just unclear. I was just thinking that if we're raising a concern over the building height above grade, then maybe we should capture that someplace.
Yep. I mean, the commission had a case this spring where, on Gore Street, where there was a proposal to raise a roof and restructure a house, and instead the commission recommended raising the entire house and inserting a new story underneath it. To preserve the form and character of the original house. And that's actually a not uncommon 19th century technique that the commission found appropriate in that case. We want to make sure that kind of thing is subject to review. I think that would certainly be covered by changes to roof form, shape, or height. So. Yep. Oh, okay. Anyone else? I only have 6 of you, no, 4 of you on the screen. I don't know. There we go. So I can't see all the raised hands at once. Kyle, Valerie, do you have any comments?
Oh, just for clarification, so there's no non-binding review. There are no elements that would fall under a non-binding review by the commission, and there's nothing that we're proposing for staff review, because I think that had been on the table previously.
Yeah, staff review would be, we had that page. Oh.
Essentially everything that's not listed here. So that can be anything from replacing windows, replacing siding, doors, things like that, would just be non-binding review. So when an applicant would submit for a permit at the city, here's another slide, but when an applicant would submit for a permit, say to replace 12 windows, it would just be staff review. So I would just simply look at the application, maybe make a recommendation, and then sign off on the permit. And that would be within a couple days. So it wouldn't have to go to a hearing. There'd be no wait for the property owner. It would just be, having a free consultation on what might be more appropriate, if anything. And then the applicant would be able to pull their permit and start work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so, many of the things on the exempt list still require a building permit, so they would come to our attention. And Eric's comments covered that situation. And then I forgot this slide, that we'd suggest the commission could adopt and delegate some reviews to staff of some alterations, such as, we do have jurisdiction over materials, but we more and more allowing synthetics, AZAC, PVC details and the like. And that could be a matter of staff review, reconstructions and window replacements. We're going to recommend that the NCD Commission adopt a window replacement policy similar to one that the Historical Commission has adopted, so that window replacements could be delegated to staff on a non-binding basis. Okay. Should we open this to public questions and comments? We can do both together.
If you have a question of fact or you'd like to make a public comment, you can use the raise hand tool. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Vice Mayor Alana Mallon for attending. Okay, Alan Green, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a comment that I may make about Cambridge Street, but I'll save that for the Cambridge Street section. I did want to restate what I've said before, is that I still would like to see no distinction being made between the registry areas and the non-registry areas. It just seems to be coming back and forth, back to that, leading me to think that such a distinction has been the intention from the start, and it's sort of being shepherded, if not railroaded through, from my perspective. But that said, can you show the last slide that you had in the presentation, which deals with that? The distinctions as given there for the external alterations in the non-national registry area don't strike me as particularly noxious. I just would like to know some examples of exterior alterations that would be allowed in the non-national registry area that would not be allowed in the national registry area. Could you give me some examples there?
Eric, can you speak to that?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Could you
Yeah, sure. You're saying that there's some all exterior alterations would be covered in the National Register properties, but in the non-national register properties, it would only be the exterior alterations that involve the four given there. So I'm wondering, what of the all exterior alterations in the National Registry? What would be prohibited there that would be allowed in the non-national registry properties?
Yeah, so this isn't about prohibiting or non-prohibiting features and alterations. It's more about what requires review by staff versus commission. So between these two, a couple things stand out. So non-national register properties, the intent was to allow to catch the larger, more comprehensive alterations and renovations, typically done by developers or someone coming in wanting to do a gut rehab or demolition or a large change to a house, which should typically get a little bit more review. But if a property owner wants to replace their doors, replace decks, things like that, it's something that would be non-binding. So this would be essentially allow private homeowners and people to review or submit plans for something, and if it's not major, it could be just staff level and approved non-binding within a couple days. But this would catch the large projects and require a hearing.
But that seems to be covered by the three bullets above. I just wanted some examples of something, I guess, that would not be reviewed in the non-national register properties that would be reviewed in the register.
Yeah, so if you had a wood frame house in the National Register District, if someone wanted to replace all the wooden clapboards and put on hardy board, it would require a review. It not necessarily be denied or approved, just it needs to go to a hearing. If it was in a non-national register, someone wanted to remove all the wooden clapboards and original wood windows, things like that, it would just be staff level review and non-binding. So that's kind of a distinction there as an example.
That's good, but there would be many different distinctions as well, or is that just a pretty good one?
That's just one example that comes to mind, but that's just an example. Exactly.
Thank you, Alan. Mary Ellen Dorn, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, this is actually Brian Dorn, her husband, and I have a comment and then a question. The comment is, I've made it clear that I opposed this historic or NCD since the beginning, and I have yet to see any compelling reason to continue to have these discussions, and it's very frustrating. But my question is, on the June 3rd Historic Commission meeting, in discussing the potential NCD study group at University Park, the commission said that NCD discussion or decisions are on design are not arbitrary, using that word. So if the goals of our NCD, as they are written here, are vague and at times seemingly contradictory, how is a decision on aesthetics, not on any materials, on aesthetics, not arbitrary? And what sort of clarity does a homeowner get in terms of what decisions are going to be decided in their favor or not? Thank you.
Sure, I can respond to that. I mean, the goals and guidelines are intentionally contradictory. There are many situations in an urban environment involving alterations, preservation, new construction that present themselves under zoning. There is relatively little or no qualitative review of projects. Projects are that fit a mathematical construct involving density and height and setbacks are automatically approved as of right. The idea of a conservation district or an historic district is that a group of citizens using their combined knowledge and common sense as informed by a goal statement or a guideline statement can reach a decision in the public interest. And so this is an approach that has been used in Cambridge, is being used in Cambridge going back to the 1980s, and that has many times gone through, and the study process that we are going through is one that is outlined in the city ordinances. We're pursuing under a city ordinance. The historical commission identified a plausible public interest in studying the idea of a conservation district. That's what we are doing. This committee may or may not make a proposal to adopt a conservation district at the end of the study. Then the historical commission will have a hearing. We'll hear from all sides of the question, and the city council will have a final say over whether or not to adopt a conservation district. But a conservation district is an approach that has been executed many times in Cambridge, and now I think over 100 communities in Massachusetts have adopted similar enabling ordinances to allow studies for conservation districts and adoption of them. So this is not something strange, and it's not something that that should not be on the public agenda. This is a matter of public interest, and so the study will play out and reach a conclusion.
Thank you, Brian. Jay Wasserman, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Let me first thank you for listening to me last week. I really need to point out this is not Disneyland. These are houses that we live in, and things like fences and basic construction. It's really critical to maintain these houses. As someone who's lived in this tenement that I've been working on for over 20 years, it's already a lot of work. Anything that just makes it easier is better. And by the way, I know many people commented last week about architects. I've pretty much changed almost every room in this house and added dormers without an architect. So that's one comment. So my real comment here is on the National Registry of Deeds. the National Registry properties. Currently, that is set up as a carrot. If you take federal money, meaning you take a loan or something to help you restore a house, they have some input. I should note you are turning that around and it becomes a stick, that there is no benefit to being in the registry of properties except you're under stricter rules. And I really think someone should consider that. And I'd really like to know the history of why the registry properties were set up what they were, because I suspect a lot of that had to do with the kind of redevelopment of this whole neighborhood in the 70s, 80s. I know a lot of things like the Centani Park that happened across the street and so on. And I suspect a lot of that was done purposely to get federal money. And I need to go before my parrot flies into something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I would just point out that there is no federal money available to owners of National Register properties. There is really no advantage unless you are a commercial property owner with a depreciable and income-producing property, in which case there are tax advantages if you invest a great deal of money in restoration. I'm not aware of any of those projects that have taken place in East Cambridge and National Register buildings. So the Register is really a planning tool. In the 1970s, we did a citywide survey of buildings that would be eligible for the National Register. We came up with about 3,000 all across the city. That was a time, that was a broad effort, and perhaps, and similar to all broad efforts, could have been more precisely drawn, and if we'd had more time, we could have come up with a different answer. But there was nothing in the way of financial consideration because those simply did not exist for ordinary property owners.
Okay. Andrew Richardson, you're next. You can unmute yourself.
I live at 176 Registry, and I just want to voice my support for what's been presented. I think it strikes a good balance, I think, between the National Register properties and the non-National Register properties. I think the distinction is justified, and it's a good balance. And I also appreciate the explanation of how the city department is on hand to help homeowners consultation with feedback within a matter of days. It doesn't strikes me as a perfect solution that isn't onerous on any homeowner embarking on a project, and can only help get them on their way.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Justin Safe, you're next. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. I just say I agree with Brian, and I think the failure to take into account the public comment by folks like him and others, who've made pretty cogent points about the overbroad nature of the district as a whole is problematic, and that okay. And I agree with Ron, and I thought this meeting was supposed to be about Cambridge Street, and we haven't gotten to Cambridge Street yet, which is typical of how these meetings go, where we waste an hour recapping things that we all already were here for last week, instead of going on to the new topic at hand. And I agree with Ron that we should just landmark the buildings that warrant landmarking, and if it's only 4 in Harvard Square, I can't imagine a large number on Cambridge Street. And we shouldn't bother to require all of Cambridge Street to be part of an onerous district that the owners and the business association don't want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Charles Hines, you can unmute yourself.
question about the roofing material. What if they have a slate roof? Is that something we should think about or help preserve? I don't know if there's any left on Cambridge Street, but I know there's a lot in the neighborhood in East Cambridge. First question, we should help people preserve those with some kind of city money too, would be nice. I know this is a little off topic, I guess, but I know the program in Dallas where they can exempt people from property taxes for so many years for doing historic restoration. Is that something that we should adopt, and can we adopt in Cambridge? So they allow up to $50,000 worth of historic restoration to be taken off your taxes and have that amortized over a bunch of years. Okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and it's been done in a few communities. I'm not aware that it's ever been discussed in Cambridge. That's a new one. I think that would require a great deal of study, and it would involve probably a lot of people in city government who are well above my pay grade to advance. But it's certainly a tool that has been used most commonly in cities that are struggling more than Cambridge is. I think it's something we'll take under consideration, and I'll try to come up with a coherent response to that. Thank you for the suggestion. As far as slate roofs go, yeah, slate roofs are significant. We've been wrestling with this. Eric, in reviewing building permits, has convinced at least a couple of properties, project managers, to preserve slate roofs in an informal way. We could add slate roofs to something, well, they would be, under this scheme, they would be subject to jurisdiction in the National Register. No, I'm sorry, they would not, because we put roofing materials on the exempt list. But I'd have,
that's what I mentioned.
yeah, so I'm happy to, I think the committee would be happy to consider exempting or not exempting slate roofs from that.
Because I know the commission helped save the slate roof on the firehouse in East Cambridge.
Yeah.
So I know there's money for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Jason Alvis, you're next up, and then we can move on to the Cambridge Street discussion.
Thanks. I just had a quick question or clarification on the signage piece of it. That seemed to be one of the only bright spots that maybe the business owners could find, is getting some relief on signage. But as I'm hearing or listening to this, it sounds like zoning on signage still prevails, so one would have to go to the BZA first, and then historical approval would be an additional step. Am I understanding that correctly? In Harvard Square, the zoning changed, but you're still taking the extra step to approve the sign. Is that accurate?
Sarah, can you comment on that, please?
Sure. So anything that meets the zoning requirements for signs would automatically get a certificate from the Historical Commission staff when they file for the permit. If the zoning code were amended for East Cambridge, as it was as part of the Harvard Square zoning overlay district, that's what allows the Historical Commission to review applications for certain types of signs that wouldn't otherwise meet the city's zoning regulations for signs. So we can't do that on our own. It would have to be a zoning change in order to create more flexibility for commercial signs on Cambridge Street.
But if the zoning were amended, then that responsibility would be solely on the Historical Commission.
Right. And if it's not amended, then it would be the we'd have to decide what the review process would be. Either just let zoning take care of it and it would be exempt in the neighborhood conservation district, or a 2-level review process. But that's one of the things that would have to be worked out before this proposal is finalized.
Okay, so historical would actually be an additional trip post getting either permission from a BZA variance or being allowed under zoning. Historical would be an extra.
Well, no, if the zoning were amended, it would be one-stop shopping.
Mm-hmm.
If the zoning were amended so that the commission could review could approve non-conforming signs, that would be one stop to the commission to get that approval.
Right.
So the commission would be able to grant a variance?
It would change what needs a variance in an overlay area, so it would loosen the zoning controls and delegate that review to the Neighborhood Conservation District Commission.
So, right, you would no longer need a variance for certain kinds of non-conforming signs, and it would be solely up to the commission to grant certificates of appropriateness for your steaming bagel or your veggie planet non-conforming sign.
Or your...
If the zoning changes to make that allowance.
Yes.
Correct.
So, and if the,
Thank you.
yeah, and if the study committee recommends that we certainly will work with the city council and the zoning, community development zoning staff to seek adoption of changes such as took place in the Harvard Square zoning.
Thank you, Jason. That's all the hands I have raised, Charlie.
Okay. We met with Jason last week and showed him an earlier version of the slideshow to discuss the effect of a conservation district on Cambridge Street. It was a very productive and helpful discussion because we were still feeling our way about how the Harvard Square guidelines might be approved in practice, and because the Cambridge Street environment is very different from the environment in Harvard Square. They're both commercial districts, but they have very different character. So I'm hoping that someone will identify the little girl in this slide. And if you do, let us know, and we'll send her a copy of this picture taken in 1958. So the Cambridge Street is a business zoning district and differs from the rest of East Cambridge in that respect. It has a wide variety of uses, some of which are exclusively residential, many of which are mixed use. There are a handful of properties on the National Register on Cambridge Street, including the Registry of Deeds, the East Cambridge Savings Bank, and the Mayflower Poultry, or part of the Mayflower Poultry complex, that would be subject to the stricter National Register jurisdiction, but all the rest of Cambridge Street would be subject to the much less strict non-register guidelines. So you can characterize Cambridge Street in a number of ways. It has evolved from what was once probably a mostly residential street until the 1920s, when many residential buildings had storefronts added to them, so that the predominant character of Cambridge Street is commercial, but not entirely. There are a couple of office buildings, and there's St. Francis's Church, and then, of course, the East Cambridge Savings Bank at one end, and Mayflower Poultry and industrial use at the far end. These aerial photographs gives you a sense of the character. There's some taller 4-story buildings plus at the east end, and then many of the buildings have, beyond that, have mixed uses, flat roofs, and are of frame construction. And then looking at the other side of the street, All of this, of course, will be on our website, so you can come back and look at this in more detail later. So one of the characteristics of Cambridge Street, as much as here as anywhere, is that change has been constant throughout its history. And of course, a commercial district needs to be able to change to meet changing commercial and social conditions. So at the corner of 7th Street or Lambert Street, this building as it appeared in 1906, maintained its character through 1946 as a cafe on the ground floor. Earlier in the earlier slide, it's a store, but for most of its life, it's been a cafe. That persisted through the 1960s, and then in 2000, the owners came to the Historical Commission for a demolition permit that took down most of the original structure, but not all, and rebuilt it in its present form with a slightly larger footprint above the first floor, the same footprint on the ground floor, and then, of course, they've added a mansard roof and a living unit at the top. The most prominent buildings on Cambridge Street are some masonry mixed-use blocks, such as these, 303 Cambridge Street where the post office is, dates from 1876. There were a number of other buildings of this generation and character east of here on Cambridge Street, but they've all been demolished one by one. And then 307 313 is next to it, is 20 years later, and is more in a turn-of-the-century style of architecture. And then this is another example from the 1880s, of a building built by William Lockhart, who was a coffin manufacturer, a major investor in East Cambridge real estate, and he was clearly looking to make an architectural statement. So these buildings are really quite significant in the architecture of Cambridge, and certainly of Cambridge Street, and certainly warrant careful treatment on the upper floors as well as in the storefronts. The post office represents the condition that I was discussing earlier in the presentation, where older storefronts have been obscured and behind layers of additional material. This material was added over probably, I would expect, 2 or 3 layers of subsequent material over the original storefront, to the point where probably what survives today are 3 or maybe 4 cast iron columns that, under the guidelines we're proposing, if those were exposed and restored, a new storefront could be designed of any character and go within that opening without a public hearing or a commission review. So there's a few more of these masonry, quite substantial mixed-use buildings, this one with its original storefronts. And then there are many older houses that were given storefronts on the ground floor between the 1890s and 1930. So there are several dozen buildings like this up and down Cambridge Street. 550 Cambridge Street on the corner was built in 1860. The storefront was inserted probably in 1896. And then more recently, it's been remodeled and covered in permastone. Then there are 2 Greek Revival or late Federal houses that are still in residential use and have front yards and residential setbacks. These are, I think, quite significant in the broader scheme of things as a representation of what Cambridge Street, how Cambridge Street has evolved. Some of these houses from this period, this is an 1825 house that received a storefront in 1926. There are quite a few of these houses with added storefronts, and they pose a question for preservation. That's an 1825 house with a very decent, very attractive storefront added to it. If the question came up about redeveloping that site, there would be loss of an early house. That would have to be balanced into the character of the replacement building. And then another example of an 1838 house, double house, half of which has been taken down with a flat roof. The other half still has its roof, and then storefronts were added in 1924 and remodeled numerous times since. And then we have houses that simply had a storefront inserted where the house was sitting on the sidewalk. The storefront was inserted, and then all of these show later alterations here again with permastone. Permastone being a cementitious masonry unit that's supplied over lath. It's a very durable type of building material that was extremely popular in East Cambridge in the 1950s and 60s and appears on a number of homes as well as on storefronts. So it's part of the character of the neighborhood now. And then there are just a couple of storefronts in original condition. This is probably the oldest, 1876. I'm not sure if the storefront has been through conversion and been restored or if it's always had this character. But that's quite a significant architectural feature on the street. On either side of it, on the left is a storefront that has been covered with permastone. That was an originally a storefront with a very large plate glass window. And on the right is another type of storefront alteration where the store has been bricked up to create a very small display window. Another original storefront, probably from about 1925. That's been preserved intact, and this one we've already seen from 1928. These storefronts typically have large plate glass windows and transoms that project light into the store, natural light, to supplement electric light. And then we have minimally altered storefronts. New Deal Fish Market was apparently had a storefront added in 1892. It's been altered a couple of times, but it retains its character simply with a change, but simply a change of materials. And then storefronts that have been reclad, like this one and the one to the left. These were probably similar in character to the New Deal Fish Market with much larger display windows and wood frames. The one on the left has been shingled up. This one has been covered with permastone. But again, now this is part of the given character of East Cambridge. We're not advocating, I wouldn't advocate removing any of this, but if this were to be removed and if there were evidence of the original enclosure behind it, then that would be an automatic permit to go ahead if that original enclosure could be restored. Another reclad storefront. This has been through a couple of generations of cladding and has received this modern ceramic material just within the last couple of years. But again, smaller display windows than certainly it had originally. And again, reclad storefront that's been just brightened up with the use of paint. Then we have some modernized storefronts in the original openings. This storefront was remodeled in 1965, and then again, I think around 2000, with modern materials, but in a traditional character and layout, as well as here at the corner of 8th Street at the Elmendorf Bakery. The brick probably dates from 1908, and the storefront windows are much more recent. So to illustrate how the Harvard Square guidelines work, that if you take out or uncover material that's been covered, you can put in a storefront of any design you desire. This building originally looked here as it does on the left, with a door to the upstairs on the left, a storefront door next to that, and then a storefront next to that, with brick piers on either end and a transom with small leaded lights that gave natural light into the storefronts. Sometime in the 1970s, I think, part of that storefront was bricked up, and the rest of it was modified and altered with a new sign band. And so the new owners came along, uncovered the brick, restored the brick facade up above, and then went ahead and just designed this glass storefront. That's how this process works. This is how it worked naturally without review, and it would continue to work without review. Then there's a question of signs. We just talked about non-conforming signs. This is non-conforming in many different ways. The projecting sign is not, I think that's non-conforming for its height. It's got neon, that's not allowed anymore. The Twin Brothers Pharmacy signs are about at least twice too large for the current sign code, which allows you 1 square foot of sign for each linear foot of storefront. This could not be recreated legally today. But the Conservation District and the zoning could be amended so that this could be found, I suppose, appropriate if one wanted to recreate this kind of signage or create some version of this kind of signage. I'm not saying this exact version could be found appropriate. There are lots of things that go into that discussion, but that's the kind of question that comes up. This building on the other corner of Cambridge Street, as it was remodeled in 1921, had a lot of non-conforming signs. Even the Roof of Furniture Company sign is, I think, too high on the building. The projecting sign projects too much. It's got neon. The billboard on the left is non-conforming. And all of those painted signs in the windows, kitchen sets, bedroom sets, parlor sets, those are all non-conforming. So I can't promise that all of these could be found appropriate if the right provisions were in place, but we think this is a more appealing type of display than the building presents today, with almost no signage and very little of character to appeal to the passerby or to entice people to shop in that store. Then there's a question of demolition and new construction. This courtside has been sold, and the current owners are pursuing a demolition of the courtside and a construction of a new project. We haven't seen that yet. It's still under jurisdiction of the Historical Commission until September, so I'm not sure that they will come in before that. But buildings like this, while they have a guaranteed appeal to many people who've have visited the courtside, architecturally they don't contribute much to the character of the avenue. And so this is a building that I would recommend be allowed to be demolished. And in the context of a replacement building that hopefully would be mixed use and would incorporate modern retail environment on the first floor. So in Harvard Square, this is the Abbott Building. In that district, we went through a very extensive and painful review process that ultimately allowed the Urban Outfitters store to be taken down. That building was behind the Abbott Building. This Urban Outfitters was in this location. And the Commission and the Community Development Department did design review and approved this infill construction, which is now being completed. So design review in the Conservation District would take for new construction would take a similar form that would take place in a public setting, and would be done to try to develop a design that is compatible with its context, that is, in this case, is clearly identifiable as a contemporary building, not an historic building, but incorporates window patterns and materials that are consistent or complementary to the buildings on either side of it and in the neighborhood. You can look around and see that much of Harvard Square is red brick, and while that's not required, that's a sort of a guaranteed way to ensure that a building is consistent with its surroundings. So that was one of the easier choices on the design review of that building. So what we hope for Cambridge Street is that Cambridge Street proprietors, retailers don't have to chase their customers quite the way that this guy is doing outside Mayflower Poultry, and that it remains a viable and well-populated and vibrant commercial area. So what we would be trying to do here is to come up with guidelines that protect the significant features of buildings primarily on the upper stories, and significant storefront details where they exist, and they're very rare, and allow property owners, retailers, and tenants to meet changing needs without undue regulation, and to support, if possible, things like that's projecting sign over the guy's head, which says Somerville, what used to be Somerville Poultry. It says live poultry. It has a rooster, and it appears to have neon tubing. None of that is legal today, but if we could help bring that kind of signage back to Cambridge Street, we would be delighted to do so. So that's the spiel on Cambridge Street. So let's hear from members of the study committee, and then take public comment again.
Valerie, you can go ahead.
Hi, yes, I noticed, and maybe I'm late noticing, but the new dumpling restaurant on Cambridge Street, I believe that one has a neon sign. Is that something that came before you, Eric?
It did not, and currently we don't have the ability to approve non-conforming signs, so I don't know if they got a special permit or something or what, but that did not go before me at all.
And are you if this went forward as Charlie's presenting, a sign like that would be reviewed by the commission?
It could be, but it would also require a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeal, which they don't typically grant those variances.
Charlie, it seems as though, in Harvard Square we've got defined language for storefront limits and things like that. By and large, it's because the nature of the buildings, as you pointed out, are bookended of sorts. Commercial buildings that actually have defined storefronts. I can't remember if there was any other language for more irregular storefronts, or if there has been any thought given to that by commission staff regarding storefronts that are formed more out of in front of houses or things like that. I didn't know if there was any precedent that the commission staff has had to deal with previously.
I am flummoxed here by the acoustics in the chamber, and I'm not sure that I totally got the question. Sarah, would you like to answer that?
Are you asking, you're asking whether Harvard Square has houses that have had storefront additions?
Well, I'm just wondering if there's any other precedent in other conservation districts that have had this particular unique character. You know, in Harvard Square, most of the storefronts are pretty well defined, and they're defined because of the nature of the commercial buildings that they are enclosed by. The uniqueness of Cambridge Street in East Cambridge, as you pointed out, is that there are a variety of storefronts that have been largely either born out of existing houses that were set back from the street and had a storefront that's effectively its own building in front, or houses that were on the street and have had irregular storefronts that have meandered around along the facade. I just didn't know if there's any other precedent within the city in a conservation district.
I think there are fewer examples of that in Harvard Square, but I can think of several that were residential originally and converted for retail use, at least on the ground floor. Mid-Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District has a variety of commercial uses in Inman Square. Some were there. The old Riles building was originally a factory. There are other buildings that were constructed as commercial establishments and some that were residential and adapted. So I think there is precedent, but there's certainly a larger number of examples here on Cambridge Street.
There's a building on Broadway next to the City Hall Annex that was a circa 1840 house that had been raised and a storefront added, an entire floor with a storefront added in the 1920s. That came before the Mid-Cambridge Commission. The owner said it was in such ruinous shape it had to come down, and the commission approved what's more or less of a replica replacement with a new storefront on the ground floor. That's just being completed now. There are precedents in Harvard Square, the three-deckers on JFK Street that have all those storefronts on the ground floor and the half level down. You know, probably closest to this situation in East Cambridge.
Charlie, this is Bill. Are there any specific regulations in the Mid-Cambridge Conservation District that would be applicable to the Cambridge Street mixed-use properties that we're considering?
I don't think so. Maybe Sarah has some ideas, but
It seems like there's some housing and stuff, not setback, unique standalone housing, but a lot of mixed-use stuff between Prospect Street going north up towards Harvard Square that fall within that district. I'm just thinking up between Inman Square and Prospect Street, there seems to be housing, mixed-use type properties, and
yeah.
those handled.
Yeah, I think they've dealt with a number of issues in those commercial properties without having any specific guidelines for them. Gavin.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, having grown up in Cambridge and lived here for most of my life, I think it's really interesting to look at the rate of development in Harvard Square right now. So there's more building and changing and dynamic things happening in Harvard Square than I have ever remembered. I mean, except for the expansion of the Red Line, which was kind of disruptive. But I mean, like, since that, there really hasn't been the scale of change that you're seeing in Harvard Square right now, and that's happening while it's a neighborhood conservation district. So I think that it's sort of worth just thinking, like, this is not necessarily curtailing change. It's just talking about, having a discussion about it. And I think that, Cambridge Street is such a great, hodgepodge of all sorts of different styles and different characteristics. And it's such a dynamic and interesting part of the city that has so much character. I think that, adopting this policy could really go a long way towards encouraging variation, encouraging new signs, and encouraging new ways of approaching this in the context of not disrupting what's lost. So I just think that this is potentially a very beneficial project and could really help Cambridge Street rather than be seen as something that's stifling it. And if people are concerned about stifling innovation, I would point out that Harvard Square, it's hard to keep track of what's happening. There's so much going on in there right now.
Ron, you had a comment on this at the beginning, and I suggested that you come back after this.
Hi, yes, thanks, Charlie. My comment was, why are we foisting this layer onto Cambridge Street against the will of the building owners, against the will of the business community? I don't see it as a benefit. We don't see it as a benefit. There's no impetus. There's no neighborhood support. I just don't know what we're doing here. What is our charter? Under what authority are we doing this? It doesn't make sense to me. And all these changes, they're not coming from the study committee, Charlie. They're coming from your commission. Just having a hard time understanding what we're doing here and why.
Well, maybe some of the other members of the study committee want to speak to that, but we initiated a process with what appeared to be strong public support a couple of years ago now, and we're.
How do you define that? Excuse me. How do you define the strong public support? I mean, you have a small group of very vocal, very dedicated, good people who have noble goals, but there is no strong public support. That's been evident since we started a year ago. So what are you basing that on, that statement, that there's strong public support? There is no strong public support.
Ron, I would disagree with that. We had very strong support from a very large audience at Sacred Heart Church in the summer of, I believe it was just before we got shut down. And there was a lot of support for a conservation district, both on Cambridge Street and within the residential boundaries of what we're looking at studying here. So I'd like to know what specific objections the business community has. And I hear the same 2 or 3 people opposing this month after month after month. You get some people signing some petition. We have people that signed up for some of the meetings that we had that strongly supported this project.
Well, Bill, I'd like to address that, Bill. You do have a small group, okay?
It might have been a small group, Ron, that originally petitioned the commission, but we expanded that throughout the community with a lot of outreach.
The same group of people that are showing support for this. It's from your group. That's the nexus of it. And we've been promised from the beginning that we're only going to go forward with this bill if there was a consensus. We're not even close to consensus. Okay? So I feel like we're wasting everybody's time. We're going to add a layer of time and expense when what we really want to do is we want to put our finger in the dike and keep the neighborhood as it is. I have the same love of East Cambridge that you do, Bill. And I admire what your group is trying to do, but I don't think this is the right way to do it.
I would just say, having attended a number of these meetings, that I don't think that anyone can claim that there's a tide on one side or the other. I've heard many, many people I think the program speak in favor of a conservation district, and I've heard people speak against it. And I think that, you know, without actually quantifying what we're saying, we hear the people who agree with us resonate more, and it's easier to say that I hear a lot of people saying what I'm saying. But I think that without quantifying these responses, it's very hard to say that there's a tidal wave on either side. And I think that if we did quantify these, and perhaps the commission staff can say if they have, I think that that would be a more rational place to start from looking at actually measured results, rather than who has spoken the longest or who has spoken the most emphatically.
Meanwhile, thank you, Gavin. Meanwhile, we're putting the cart before the horse continually. We're never really addressing the question, do we need a conservation district in East Cambridge?
Ron, sorry if I'm interrupting, but how about, this is supposed to be a study, a discussion. Why not having the discussion and being open to see what is it that we can do for also business owners and new potential businesses, instead of saying no without even having a discussion?
I think it's an overreach. We don't have the charter to do what you're trying to do. There's no need for it. There's no support for it. It's a very small focus group, and we've been trying to gin up interest in the group and the study commission in our meetings. It's the same people that are attending every time. There is no interest. There's certainly no consensus. And I feel like we're wasting everybody's time, but we're proceeding like we're going to adopt this thing. So we're rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. I feel we're doing details that we shouldn't be even there yet. We should be talking about, is this needed? Is there support? Is there consensus?
We wouldn't even be having the conversation if it were for opponents. This is supposed to be a study. It's not supposed to be something set in stone that we're going to adopt tomorrow.
But at its core,
we're having the opportunity to shape what it is that this study can or cannot achieve, instead of just shutting down the conversation, which I find, honestly, sorry to say, quite rude.
So, Francesca, you think I'm being rude?
I think
No.
the attitude of shutting down the conversation is extremely rude.
Okay. Well, I think it's extremely rude having us sit here month after month, being told that your time will come, Ron, you'll be able to speak. I've been wanting to share for months now my personal experience with historic commissions and the unintended consequences of historic commissions. And I haven't been allowed to speak. I've asked Charlie and Eric this for months now, and I've been put off and I've been put off. I don't think, look, just because I don't think it's right for Cambridge doesn't mean I don't sympathize for the people that are in support of this, okay? I do share your love for East Cambridge and its history and its demographics, where we came from, where it is now, and I fear losing it too. I just don't think this is the right tool to blunt that. And I don't think we're being honest with ourselves by trying to say that we're going to hand over these important decisions and add this whole layer, force this layer of work on our neighborhood.
I would have a question then. Why did you participate and apply for the position?
Because I have a love for the community. I have a love for the neighborhood. I thought that we could identify 10 to 15 properties that we really want to save from the wrecking ball. Okay? But that was dismissed right away. So we want to stay with these vague and contradictory rules and guidelines, which put all the power into a group of civilians appointed by the city manager. It doesn't make any sense. And this whole thing came from a group of how many petitioners?
Ron, this is Valerie speaking. are your feelings the same both for the residential side and the commercial, or is it strictly on the business of the commercial side?
No, definitely both sides. There are some buildings that I think that we have a real opportunity now to save. Okay, and I think we should specify what those buildings are, why they're important to the fabric of the community. And I'd like to save them because I've seen some really beautiful buildings all around Massachusetts coming down that shouldn't have. So I thought we could do some real good, but I think we're overstepping, we're overreaching, and we're going to get voted down. And we're as they say, perfection is the enemy of the good. We can do some real good here, but I feel like we're overstepping, and we're going to get shut down, and nothing's going to happen. We're not going to be able to do any good. This isn't about Cambridge Street or just the business community. This is about what are we doing and what's our charter, and is there a consensus? Like Charlie said at the beginning, there is none. So what are we doing? Why are we continuing this? Why aren't we having this conversation?
Ron, you mentioned that this isn't the right vehicle. In your mind, what would be? You know, what is the right methodology or right approach to be able to address some of the concerns that the petitioners have, and most certainly you have regarding, you know, the neighborhood of East Cambridge?
I'm not a public policy expert, Kyle, but I'd be open to discuss that, but probably not ideally in this forum. I don't know what the answer is. How you stop progress, how you stop change, how you stop what happened to Kendall Square from happening here, how you stop what's happened to Harvard Square from happening here. Harvard Square is now Times Square. Davis Square is the new Harvard Square.
I don't think that what the conservation district is trying to do is to stop progress or stop change.
I don't think so either. I don't think that's your intent.
Okay.
But I think we all have this nostalgic fondness for the way things were for the workers that lived in East Cambridge and for the fabric of the neighborhood that was. But I look around at the demographics now. The families really leave after the kids become school age. They don't stay in East Cambridge anymore. It's young professionals. It's like that ship has already sailed. So what we're trying to get back has already left. So I feel like we're fighting this losing battle with the wrong tool. And my opinion is shared by many people in East Cambridge that I'm close to and that I talk to.
Ron, I think that to some degree there's a valid point there. Like, you can't restore East Cambridge to what East Cambridge was in the 70s or 80s or before. And that's true. But this is the ability to hold on to some part of the fabric of what makes up East Cambridge, some part of the physical appearance of what it is, and to make that better and to make that adaptable and adjustable within a framework of holding on to some part of what made that valuable. And I think that there are very few tools that exist in city planning to preserve a population. Like, you can't preserve a population, you can't preserve an individual store or an individual business, you can't landmark those things. There's no way to say, you know, we should still have delicatessens. Like, there's no tools to do that. But you can say, we still want the storefronts that look something like what we remember of this neighborhood. And we don't want to, you know, cast them in amber so that they don't change. We want to find a way that they can change and they can evolve, but evolve so that when you go back to the neighborhood or where you are, you know, walking down the street, you can still see a part of what was there. And I think, you know, Harvard Square has evolved. And I grew up in Harvard Square. I spent most of my childhood and teenage years in Harvard Square, and it certainly has changed. And I was heartbroken when Bailey's Ice Cream closed, but no policy could have stopped Bailey's Ice Cream from closing. There's no way to save that or the character or the people who made up Harvard Square. But what you can do is you can say, you know, I can still go back, I can still see something approximates the landscape that I saw when I was a child growing up. There's still something that, you know, is familiar in that. It's still on the scale, it's still in the proportion. And I think that there's a value in that, even if it's now, you know, a Chipotle or whatever it is. It's not actually where the Bailey's was, but that's just beside the point. So I think that there really is, I think there's a value in looking at some of the fabric and saying some of this fabric is worth keeping, some of this fabric is not worth keeping, some of this is worth keeping, but letting it change and letting it evolve. And that's essentially just the tools that we're trying to adopt here. And I don't know that there's any tools that we can go back to that will create, you know, ample affordable housing or economic diversity that existed in my childhood. Like, there's no policy way to do that, but this is a way to maintain something of what was there.
So
we have vague rules that contradict each other, and we have civilians who aren't experts appointed by the city commissioner implementing their opinion of those contradictory rules. And it's not fair to the citizens of East Cambridge to put them through that.
Okay, Ron, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. And I'm sorry to cut you off again. I really don't mean to do that, and I really hope we can have some more extended discussion, but we have to be out of here at 8 o'clock sharp. I would just observe that the process, people who are against this, I'm afraid don't really know what they're against, because we don't know what we're for yet. We're still putting together a proposal. So to say that the business people are against it, there's nothing to be against except the concept of a conservation district, because we don't have a specific proposal. Where we're going with this is that we're on a short leash here, a short time frame. This is the calendar of meetings. The jurisdiction of the Historical Commission expires in September. The schedule that we adopted in January imagined finalizing the draft preliminary report in August. We don't have to get to the commission in September. We can go in October. The committee can continue this as long as it wants to, but I think it's time to wrap it up. And so what I'm going to suggest is that we schedule an extra meeting on June 30th or July 7th to continue this discussion over Cambridge Street and to review this language in detail, and that we promise that we will get you hard copies in advance so that you can have something specific to be for or against. And then in this process, we will once the committee has approved a draft with dissenting opinions, we'll certainly entertain those. We'll put out a postcard poll to every property owner and tenant that we can find in East Cambridge and see where the sentiment is. I mean, it's one thing to say there's no consensus, but none of us is tapped into the broader community to say that there is a consensus one way or another. I'm buoyed here by the continued dedication of the study committee members who represent the community. If they want to propose pulling the plug at any time, then the study committee will need to consider that. But my recommendation is to stay the course, come up with a specific proposal, offer it to the community, and see if there's support for it or not. And then, if not, the committee can decide what to do. If there is support, it seems to be support, then it goes to the Historical Commission, and then it goes to the City Council, which is certainly qualified to make its own decision about where a consensus lies.
Charlie, how do you propose to determine if there's support?
I said we would have a postcard poll reaching out to every property owner and tenant this summer, once we have a specific proposal to offer. So it is 7:53. We have little enough time for public comment, but I'm aware that Councillor Mallon is or has been on, and maybe she would like to speak. But in general, I hope that people could speak to the specific topics that are on the agenda, the goals and guidelines, and the jurisdiction and the Cambridge Street aspects of the jurisdiction.
Okay, we'll start with John Wisdant because we haven't heard from him yet tonight. You can unmute yourself. Sorry, John, I may have muted you. You can unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, great. I live in East Cambridge. I'm within the National Register designation area. And to me, the reason we need a conservation district is fairly straightforward. It will give us a collective voice. And without that collective voice, without a conservation district, then what our neighborhood's going to look like, residential or commercial, is going to be left to each individual property owner. And if the property owner is a developer, which is more and more the case, and if they're only in it to maximize profits, then they can decide to strip the building of all its architectural features. It just saves the money. And we, the neighbors, can only stand by and watch the buildings being stripped down. And this makes no sense to me. Absolutely no sense. We need a collective, neighborhood-based voice in how East Cambridge evolves. And that's why I'm all for this proceeding to continue and to continue to have the discussion. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm setting the timer for 2 minutes this time.
Okay, Vice Mayor Mallon?
Oh, not for Vice Mayor Mallon, she gets 3.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am just here observing this meeting this evening, but I did want to jump in and say that I appreciated Ron's comments. I have to say I agreed with almost everything that he had to say, and I am curious. I am curious about this proposal. I am curious about the rest of what the next steps are. I do hope, I'm looking at the schedule, and I do hope that we will see something in September or October, because I know that there was COVID and I know that there was an extension, but I do think that this needs to get wrapped up. I came tonight, I had some specific concerns around Cambridge Street and the small business community and the owners, and I was disappointed that, it took almost 40 minutes to get to that point. I feel like we didn't even really have a good, deep conversation about how this will affect the owners along Cambridge Street. So, again, I'm just here to observe. My comments really are, I hope we can keep to the schedule that is laid out before us here on the screen, because I think we really need to get this finalized. So thank you again for allowing me to speak. I yield back.
Thank you for attending tonight. Justin Safe, go ahead.
Thank you. Cambridge Street is an urban core transit corridor. The NCD has proposed would drive up costs and block additional housing there. We need certainty to create housing. The NCD takes away from the streamlining provided by the affordable housing overlay, as even affordable housing approvals by the NCD Commission could still result in neighbors suing over the contradictory guidance, as we know happened recently in Harvard Square. I saw an article in the Chronicle from 10 or 15 years ago in which homeowner proponents of a different NCD also supported it because it would enrich them by driving up their home values. They also discussed how the members of the NCD Commission exercised the great power given to them unfairly. East Cambridge already has a divide between incumbents and relative newcomers, and the NCD and the Commission would only exacerbate that. That's the problem with having completely contradictory guidance. Frankly, given the insults directed at opponents tonight that we don't know what we oppose, even though the outcome of this process has been entirely clear from the very start, no one can trust any postcard poll that would be created as a fair way to assess the views of the neighborhood. And the idea that Harvard Square is a good example for Cambridge Street is not well taken. Harvard Square is killing off small businesses and replacing them with ATMs and international chains. You drive the costs up, you drive the small businesses out. I don't think that's anyone's vision for Cambridge Street. You do best for Cambridge Street by doing nothing, not by driving up small business rents and preventing new small businesses from getting started. If there are 4 or 5 landmark buildings that should be designated as such, great. Anything else you should not do. Thank you.
Thank you. Betty Sicoccio.
Hi, it's Marie. We're sharing the computer. I just want to say I was part of the original group when we met for almost a year in St. Francis Church Hall. Each meeting, and we met twice a month, I invited Jason Alves to the table. So ab initio, we wanted the business association involved. I never got a reply. Finally, when we stopped having our meetings, it was probably at least 9 months later, Jason suddenly emailed me. He says, I'm at the church hall, where are you? So I said, well, we've summed up everything at that point. So there definitely was outreach by the original group. I had done considerable research on positive impact of conservation vis-a-vis ADA requirements, because I knew that there was what they call a drive-by attorney who was filing suit over frontages on small businesses in right on Cambridge Street. And they're valid suits, but at the same time, a conservation district intact could protect the small business owner from onerous alterations if the conservation panel had decided that it would absolutely destroy the historic value of the frontage. So we really saw it, and I went to federal court. I got the complaints that were filed. I even talked to one of the owners. It was at all time, it was our intention to protect the small businesses on Cambridge Street. If nobody showed, and I actually even shared the legal research with Jason, if no one showed, then shame on them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Marie.
you, and it's 8 o'clock. I'm sorry to cut things off, but our broadcast slot is ending. We will poll the committee members about meeting on June 30th or July 7th, because it's 5 weeks to July 21, and that's a long time that we can use more productively. And then we'll have the end of this process in sight. We can wrap it up one way or another and get on with our lives, in East Cambridge or elsewhere.
And I've taken note of the 4 people who we did not get to, and we can give you first chance at the next meeting.
Yep.
Or you can send me an email and I can distribute it to the committee members prior to the next meeting.
Yep. So thank you all very much, and good night. And committee members, keep sending in your edits and comments, and we'll keep refining this language and have something that we can share with you and the public. Good night.
Thank you.